Seated. For the Vice President Emeritus of the Supreme Court of Israel, Elyakim Rubinstein, he is already in the room, as well as the panel participants. And therefore, we would please ask you all to take your seats. If you could just all please be seated. I would like to invite the Vice President Emeritus of the Supreme Court of Israel to sit alongside Mr. Attila Somfalvi so that we can go ahead with the next session, Refugees or Illegal Migrants. Attila, the floor is yours. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The Honorable Vice President Emeritus of the Supreme Court of Israel, Elyakim Rubinstein, once a judge, always a judge. Welcome. Welcome to the discussion that is ripping apart Israeli society. And with your permission, I would like to delve directly into this, and that is the override bill that is currently an outcome of the discussion of refugees. And so what do you think about the override bill as a tool? I think this is an unnecessary political discussion, and it is not necessary, not in this issue or otherwise. And I just want to say something from an aspect that is less spoken of, and that is the international aspect. I think the override bill actually undermines the status of the Supreme Court in the world. It is like an anti-bullet vest, and the court in its own right is an asset, a strategic asset to the state of Israel. I can give you many examples, and we are short on time, but when we wanted to be accepted to the OECD, I was appointed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to be part of this committee. And one of the items on the checklist as to which country is appropriate or should be considered to be part of the OECD is the justice system independent? And our court is always ranked, and anywhere in the world and in the big countries, Canada, the UK, the US, and also among countries, you look at the legal system, the justice system, and that is not the kind of institute you want to hurt. You don't think there should be any dialogue on the impact of the Supreme Court, on the executive, on the legislative? Look, a dialogue is always a good thing, but if there was a basic law of legislation, a basic law that would provide the entire menu, the entire legislation process, how it should be, and then you want to put in a clause, and I want to give you another example. We have disrespect for the constitution in Israel and the rulings of the Supreme Court, and nobody talks about that. But that often saves the Knesset from itself, so to speak, and I'm not trying to be condescending. But when you read the rulings about, say, the biannual budget, and I don't want to go into more detail than that, the Knesset sometimes passes basic laws and sometimes treats them with respect to the Knesset as if they were just kind of like a municipal law of a certain city or town. And it is not. It is like a chapter in our constitution. So you should treat it with respect. If there would be a basic law of legislation where that is respected, that will also be talked about. And in the world, there is one place where there is an override bill or notwithstanding clause, as they call it in Canada. And okay, so how would you define the efforts to pass this bill, and how dangerous is it to Israeli democracy? Well, I don't want to talk apocalyptically about this, but I can tell you one thing. To me, whoever reads the rulings will see that there is no need for these changes. And what I find terrible as a citizen and as a public servant is that it has become a matter of right and left. Because those who are in the center and to the left of it support the court, ostensibly, whereas the center and to the right, or the actual right, support the override bill. And I will say one more thing, and that's also quite painful and tragic. I am part of the religious Zionism, and in religious Zionism, many believe in the override bill as if it is a magic potion. And what's happened here? First of all, the court is being attacked and is becoming the enemy of the people. And just like that member of Knesset who said that rather than the pillar of the state, it is the pole of massacre of the state, which is a play on words in Hebrew. And then the relevant public who is associated with this member of Knesset will support the override bill, and then you can no longer get away from it. And there's a story about a cantor who on Yom Kippur Eve goes home from the synagogue unhappy, and his wife asks why, and he answers, well, the gabbai told me that I didn't pray nicely, and she said, forget about him. Whatever he says, people say the same. People repeat him. He's just repeating what other people are saying. So when the public pressures you, so the politicians are actually just giving up because of what, or are pressured into saying things because of what other people are saying. Well, in my day and age, we didn't have all these talkbacks online, but you can always explain away a bill one way or the other. I think that you should read the court rulings, the court verdicts, because if you were to do that, even though the court can, of course, make a mistake and all judges are human, you do expect the Prime Minister to put a stop to this. Well, I don't think he's too happy about it. But because of what I've said about the international aspect, because the Prime Minister is also a political person and he's also the Minister of Foreign Affairs, did you talk to him a bit about this? Because he's met the President of the Supreme Court. Yes, I have met with him, and we talked, and I don't want to go into detail. It was several weeks ago, and we had a very long chat. And what were you impressed that he wasn't happy with it? Well, I don't want to speak on his behalf. Yes, but how did you feel? What did you come out with? I believe that in his value system, this certainly is not a top priority. But you can just think of logic. Where did this come from? It all came from the asylum seekers or refugees or whatever you want to call them, infiltrators, and let's say that they were to change the law and say that we can actually tell them to leave the country, then I'm coming out from a verdict. So let me stop you on this matter because we've changed the subject.
We're talking about refugee seekers, and this reached your desk as a judge, and then you handed down a ruling, a decision that said there is no reason to prevent the removal of asylum seekers from Israel because it changed over time and said that the state deceived us, that based on the information we were given, we handed down the ruling that we were given. I don't want to go back into that. It was a specific thing that was called, it was a third country, Rwanda. I'd like to read a brief paragraph of something I wrote in that ruling when I quoted myself in another ruling, that the solutions require a delicate balance between national and public interests, at the center of which is to prevent mass migration and to minimize the number of migrants coming into the country, especially in areas where there are weaker populations. And on the other hand, Israeli law and international law and protecting the lives of people who are genuine asylum seekers. In other words, anyone who comes here illegally, sometimes they come from a tyranny where everyone is subjugated to the regime. And my late daughter, if I may be personal for a moment, who was a representative of the foreign ministry, and I sat on, she helped me very much to change the policy as far as the Eritreans are concerned. Because if I may, Attila, a few days ago, I thought, what will I say here? And I said, I think I'll say two things. One, that we need to find a program, a solution that does not ignore the plight of the residents of southern Tel Aviv. And why should we ignore it? They are our own people, and they're also weak people. But we need to find a solution for those people for whom there is no proper way to remove them, and time must do what it does. Can you talk about the solution? In a moment. And I thought that the second thing I need to say is there are thousands of requests. You have no idea. In a country of law and order, a few months ago, I heard about 8,000, 9,000 people who are just waiting for an answer or waiting for their cases to be discussed. And what's more obvious than that? It just so happens, a few days later, I read the state controller's report. 2 days ago, he issued 2 reports which are filled with documentation. His information is much better about the treatment and about the lack of treatment. The lack of a strategy. They both relate with a lack of the examination or consideration of the thousands of forms of applications. I think that may be deliberate. That doesn't need to be deliberate in a country that is ruled by law. If just a few dozen were accepted out of thousands, it looks strange. And I would think that I was very happy when the solution, that short-lived solution with the United Nations, and I read that perhaps they're trying to revive that solution. And they used to say that Ben-Gurion would distinguish between dead and dead and buried. Dead can be revived. Dead and buried, too late. And so I think maybe it's only just dead and not dead and buried. But on the assumption that it's possible, okay. If not, then there needs to be some kind of strategy. I recently met with Yoram Ariav, who's sitting here, and about the matter of employment, what you can do when you are with people. What is the preferred legal solution? I'm putting all this responsibility in your lap. First of all, I can't tell you I just want to speak on behalf of common sense. And common sense says that Israel is a product that if you could manufacture it, you could make a lot of money. But common sense says that even if we had the override bill, what would you do? They're already here, and you'd start looking for this and for that. It would be chaos. You want to remove them, as many as you can, but you want to do it fairly. In the meantime, you have to have some kind of interim solution. Let me give you an example. In southern Tel Aviv, you didn't, for example, instruct the state to disperse the people. No, it wasn't a petition. We talked about, to the best of our knowledge, let me give you an example. In southern Tel Aviv, if the public there, the Israeli public, feels harmed by the presence of this population, that's understandable. If I were there, I might feel the same way. So the police, the enforcement, there must be presence of police so that people feel safe to go outside. And you have to come up with provisional or temporary solutions, employment, not in South Tel Aviv. Maybe there's work in Hadera or somewhere else. In view of everything that you said, is it your impression that the state has done everything it can to not use the common sense approach and then to evade any kind of solution? I won't say it's deliberate. You know, democracies don't always have control over everything that happens. It's true that many illegals are here. It's possible that after the exam, we found that not so many of them are indeed asylum seekers. We have a unique history where we were persecuted and so on. So in the law, there is something we call in evidentiary law that a little extra something that you have to have. You need something extra in this area. And that extra thing is generosity, you know, to be a mensch. We talk about being a mensch. So you have the subject of being a mensch. I'm not saying that the fear among some people in the political system that some of these people remain here, that suddenly it's going to bring further waves of immigration. So you can prepare for that. Look, they made that fence on the border with Egypt, and it works. Aren't you afraid that that might happen if they are given citizenship here? I think it's exaggerated, that fear. Retired Justice, former Deputy President of the Supreme Court, Elyakim Rubinstein. We will continue